An important component of professional identity is to not only be able to understand what makes you a professional, but to be able to articulate the traits that you have when asked to do so. In this week's module, we're really going to focus in on being able to articulate the traits that set you apart and that make you the professional that anybody else would want to hire. Have you ever been in an interview and been asked, "So tell me, why should I hire you?" This is one of the times where it's most critical where you're able to talk about your strengths that make up your professional identity. If you're asked, "Why should I hire you?" it's your chance to shine and display the traits that set you apart, both verbally and how you relay them. So how do you answer this question? Are you like the guy in the cartoon that struggles to come up with an answer at all, or struggles to figure out a way to be sincere and to really emphasize their strengths? Or do you have a well thought out plan of how you're going to answer this question? For the next few slides, we'll look at how you can put together a plan so that when asked this question, you'll knock it out of the park. So let's start to talk about how you should answer the question of why should I hire you? Remember that professional identity is your ability to show what your strengths are and the characteristics that you have that set you apart as a candidate and as a professional. This is your chance to really shine. In an interview, if you're asked, "Why should I hire you?" you're essentially being asked to talk to them about what it is that sets you apart as a candidate, what makes you special, and what makes you the person that they should hire. So when asked that question, you should focus on coming up with 3 or 4 highlights that you want to focus on that really shows what sets you apart. These things can be industry experience or experience in performing certain tasks or duties. But remember, we're not trying to just talk about the basics here. Simply saying, "I've worked for a year in sales," doesn't really do much to set you apart and doesn't really make me as an interviewer very interested in learning more about you or thinking that you're the person that I have to have on my team. Instead, talking about industry experience or experience you have in certain tasks or duties, it's important to talk about things that set you apart, and we'll learn more about that in a minute. You also have an opportunity to talk about technical skills or soft skills. What are the things that you've done that set you apart? What are the skills that you have? Are you a great person to talk in groups or in individuals? Are you great working in teams? Are you great as a problem solver? What are the skills that you have that really set you apart? And how do you demonstrate that? You can also talk about key accomplishments or awards or accolades. What are the things you've done that really set you apart or that show that you shine as an employee? Have you won awards or commendations at your work? If so, let's talk about them, but talk about them in a way that you're not bragging. Let's look at this in more depth. Here's an example of how 2 candidates might answer the same question of "Why should I hire you?" Both candidates actually, on a foundational level, have addressed 4 different concepts of what makes them a great candidate. However, keeping in mind what we just talked about, candidate 1 goes into a lot more depth to really show not only do they have the experience, but the experience that they have that really sets them apart. So remember, we're not just talking about some basics here. Basics show that you meet the minimum qualifications for a job. Oftentimes, every other candidate that's being interviewed meets the minimum qualifications for a position, or they wouldn't be there. This is your chance to talk about what sets you apart from those others that have those minimum qualifications. So we don't just want to say that I have a degree in business. Everybody being interviewed has a degree in business, most likely for this position. But how can I talk about myself in a way that extends beyond just the basics? A much better answer is to say, I graduated with honors with my degree in business, and I sought out leadership roles in college and clubs that has given me experience in leading people. You can see other examples here as well of how to talk about skills such as your dependability, your creativity, and your experience in working in teams, but doing so that shows not only are you able to do these things, but giving proof that you're able to do them and showing that you can do them in a manner that puts you apart, that sets you apart, and shows that you're able to go above and beyond. So at the end of this interview, who would you hire? I'd hire candidate 1 because they're able to articulate their skills in a way that shows that there's something special about them. They're more than just someone who meets the minimum qualifications. Having interviewed a number of candidates, actually hundreds throughout my career, I can tell you that these mistakes that people make in the interview are very real and they're very frequent. People oftentimes make the mistake in interviews of not being able to articulate their talents in an effective way. These are different ways, the most common ways that people do so. One is lack of preparation. Be prepared to speak to your strengths. Whether it's a specific question like, "Tell me why I should hire you," or "Tell me what your strengths are," or just general questions about talking about your experience, Being able to talk to your strengths in a coordinated way and in a prepared way will really help you be set apart. Another mistake is modesty. You'd be surprised how many people just simply struggle to articulate strengths and accomplishments in a way that really shows that they're something special. An interview is not the time to make yourself seem modest or to make yourself seem like someone who doesn't go above and beyond. This is the time to really display your strengths. Don't make the mistake of being too modest in an interview. Some candidates are also too general. You don't just want to list a few generic bullet points that seem to respond to the job description. List specifics with some depth and answers. The examples of the two candidates we just looked at is certainly a case of this. Both candidates basically answered the same characteristics that they had as far as their strengths for the reasons they should be hired. One just did it with a bulleted list of characteristics. The other listed the characteristics in some depth and examples of why. But lastly, you don't also want to talk too much. Limit your answer to 1 or 2 minutes. It's about quality of answer, not quantity. The interviewer's mind will start to wander after a minute or two of hearing an answer to a question. I can admit that I've done that myself as I interview candidates. So be able to demonstrate your strengths and talk about them, the skills that set you apart, in a very succinct way that hits on your characteristics and the things you want to talk about without going overboard. In the previous example, candidate 1 would have been able to go through all 4 bullet points in probably no more than 1 minute and really impress the interviewer in the process. So far, we've talked about why it's important to understand your strengths and be able to articulate them in an interview. Now let's get specific about how you're going to do it when the time comes. The first step in the process is really to brainstorm as you prepare for how you might answer the question of what your strengths are that define your professional identity. So sit down for a few minutes and brainstorm about this. Think about what your most impressive accomplishments are at work. What are the things that you've maybe received awards for or special recognition from your boss? What do you do better than almost anybody else in your current job? Are you fantastic at working with clients or customers? Are you fantastic at making sales and you've done better than anybody else in your organization? Are you a people person? Are you great at presentation? Or are you always a great leader in teams? What is it that sets you apart? What is it that you would say you do better than almost anybody else in your current job? What are the most important aspects of this position from the company's perspective? It's also important to relate your strengths back into what the company is looking for. It might be fantastic that you've got a lot of experience working in teams and that you excel in that environment, but if this position is going to be one where you're working at home and almost never in other groups and working alone as an individual on projects, then talking about your teamwork skills probably isn't the best thing to focus on for this particular position. So take a second to read the job description. What are they asking for? What are the qualifications that they want to see? And then you can brainstorm the ways that you meet these key components of the job description. Lastly, what makes you unique from other candidates? It all gets back to the questions of what are your accomplishments? What do you do better than almost anybody else in your current job? These are the things that make you unique. But maybe you've got some personal skills as well that make you unique. Maybe you've received special trainings. Maybe you've had the chance to go and present at conferences in your field. Whatever it is that you feel like might make you unique, start to think about that and list it at this point. Remember, we're just brainstorming now, so if you come up with 10, 12, or even 20 ideas for what it is that your strengths are that set you apart, that's not a bad starting point. We'll narrow it down in a second. So now you've brainstormed a list, and hopefully you've come up with several ideas for how you might answer the question of your strengths to articulate your professional identity. Now we're going to start to narrow that down. A good place to start to narrow it down is to again go back to the job description. What you list as your strengths might vary from interview to interview or from opportunity to opportunity. Each position is unique, so your strengths you'll want to make sure are unique as well as you talk about them so that they meet up with what the employer is looking for. So from your brainstorming list, let's get down to 3 or 4 key things that will make the most impact and are most impressive in describing you. 3 or 4 things are sufficient. Rattling off a list of 8 or 10 things in an interview is not. You'll simply lose the focus of the interviewer and it won't go well. So think about the 3 or 4 that most relate to this position and the 3 or 4 that you feel make the most impact in how they describe you. You won't want to write a script for each item, but you'll want to prepare how you would describe each item that you've picked in a concise way. If you want to refer back to the previous slide of how candidate 1 answered these questions, that's a great idea or a great model to follow in identifying how you might answer very succinctly not only what your strengths are and why you should be hired, but how you can display that, what your evidence is that backs that up. So not only I'm great in teams, I'm a great team member, but I'm a fantastic team member. Not only do I work in teams, but I often take on a leadership role, and my teams always meet their goals whenever a deadline's given. The third step is simply to practice. Practice your bulleted answers as many times as need be, and practice them for each specific interview that you're doing, or each time you're getting a chance to network even. You'll want to start thinking about how you'll articulate your strengths. Remember, each situation might be a little bit different. Nobody likes to hear themselves talk. Nobody likes to watch themselves practice an interview, but it's certainly not a bad idea to take this time to practice. National Louis University offers practice interviews through the Career Services Department where you can record yourself and sit down with a Career Services advisor to watch your answers. While it might not make you comfortable, it might be a great way to prepare for your next job interview. Even if you're not comfortable doing that or don't want to take the time, simply practicing these answers in your head or in front of a mirror would be the best way to prepare for your next upcoming interview. The fourth and final step in preparing is to start to add confidence and energy to your answer. While you want to prepare how you'll answer the question and start to memorize your answers, the last thing you want to come off as in an interview is someone who's basically just reading a scripted answer from their head. Your answers are being judged not only for the content of them, but the other aspects that make the answer that you're giving. Think beyond your words. Spoken language involves 3 different components. The language, the actual spoken or written words, actually only make up about 7% of the meaning that the listener takes away from the conversation or from the answer. There's other elements that play a critical role. For example, paralanguage makes up 38% of the meaning that the listener takes away. These are the vocal elements that go along with the words. Things like pitch, the tone, the rate, the volume, all things that you talk at, all aspects of your language and communication. These are things that can display confidence. They're the things that can display that you're comfortable, that you're confident, and that you bring excitement and passion to what it is that you're there for. Finally, nonverbal cues make up more than half of the meaning that the listener is going to take away from what you say. Nonverbal cues are the ways that the message is sent. Everything from eye contact, hand gestures, your posture, your facial expressions, etc. make up key components of the meaning that's going to be taken away from what you're answering in the interview. So be confident, not just in the words you're saying, but in your tone and in your nonverbal cues, the way you sit, the way you approach the interviewer, and with your eye contact. Let's look at an example in a minute. If you think that the spoken words are sufficient, then here's 2 examples of why the words alone aren't enough. I'm going to read the same statement in 2 different ways. In answer to the question, why should I hire you? I'm a team player. I've regularly been recognized with employee awards for going above and beyond in my position I'm in currently. I'll bring that positivity and willingness to help you and your team. Now here comes the answer from candidate number 2. Well, I'm a team player. I've regularly been recognized with employee awards for going above and beyond in my current position, and I'm going to bring that positivity to you and that willingness to help your team. Can you tell the difference in the tone, the pitch, and the way that those words are spoken? Hopefully candidate number 2 came across with a lot more passion and energy and enthusiasm for the job, as well as confidence in their abilities. Remember, all these things are a key part of what makes up your answers. So don't just practice the words and write down the words, but practice how you're going to say those words to make sure that your point gets across and that your meaning shows to the listener that you're confident, that you're passionate, and that you're the professional they need to hire. And lastly, all these aspects are also there with the written language. Remember that while communication meaning comes from things beyond just the actual words that you're saying when you're speaking, in nonverbal or communication that's not spoken but written, these aspects are also there. For example, If you're using email or any other type of electronic communication, remember to be professional in your answers there as well. Grammar and spelling are critical. The last thing you want to do in a letter or a quick email to someone who wants to offer you a position or wants to interview you is to have grammatical mistakes or spelling errors. That would be just as bad as having a moment of silence or a poor answer in an interview. Have a professional tone. Use an appropriate introduction, an appropriate conclusion. Say thank you. No emojis. An email to a prospective boss or a prospective company that you want to work for is not the time to unveil your emojis. Display the professional strengths that you want to talk about in the nonverbal aspects of your written communication as well. So now we've had a chance to go through this week's module of preparing to articulate the professional traits that set you apart. As you work through these, you'll be prepared for the next interview that you have and be prepared to answer any questions that come your way about your strengths and why you should be hired in a way that will set you apart. But this isn't the only time you'll be able to use this. There's other times and aspects of your professional job search and professional identity where these answers are going to be just as important. As we move through the class and talk about networking and branding statements, we'll talk more about ways that you can make yourself shine as a professional to anybody in your field.